Hello and welcome. My name is Joe and I am the Panicked Monk, and you are watching the mini adventures of Derkara. In this episode, I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm not going to really talk. I'm not going to do any commentary. I'm not going to do any voicing of Derkara or any inner monologue or anything like that. What I am going to do, however, is I'm going to put on some chill, relaxed music in the background, and I have a hard copy of some of the books in Skyrim, and I think what I'm going to do is, as Derkara ventures forth, I'm going to read some of those books, and I think we'll start with finishing off the guide to Whiterun that Derkara had started earlier. We know that from past episodes, Derkara wants to build a bed, and he needs linen to do that. Unfortunately, he has not been able to find any linen anywhere. None of the general traders, neither in Falkreath or Riverwood, seem to have any linen on them. After spending the night in Riverwood and making his way back to Millwater, Derkara is going to don his armor and go back and check out a little bit more of Bleak Falls Barrow to see if maybe he can find some linen there. If he does, he's going to come on back, and I think we're going to build a few things and maybe have the carpenters help us out. So, without further ado, let's get to it. The Holds of Skyrim, a Field Officer's Guide, The Reach. Dominating the western border of Skyrim, the Reach is made up almost entirely of steep, craggy mountains. Little grows in this forbidding realm, but the capital city of Markarth is a nigh impregnable stone fortress that would make an excellent defensive position for either side in the war. Be aware that this dangerous region of Skyrim is home to the Forsworn, the rebellious natives of the Reach. They know the terrain, can strike without warning, and count the Empire as an enemy. If they attack, you must neither give nor expect any mercy. The Rift. This hold occupies the southeast corner of Skyrim, and much like the Reach in the west, is dominated by tall mountain peaks. The climate in the Reach is milder than in the northern holds, and there is more vegetation to be found here. Farming thrives as a result. A word of warning about Riften, the hold's capital city. Our agents have reason to suspect that the Thieves' Guild makes its home here, though it is now much diminished from its strength of previous years. Nevertheless, mind that your men keep an eye on their coin purses should they have reason to spend any length of time in the city. Whiterun. This central hold is characterized by wide, grassy plains that are home to numerous farms. Many roads pass through Whiterun, joining the more distant holds together. The hold's capital city, also called Whiterun, sits high on a rocky promontory amid a large, flat swath of scrubland. Among the wealthiest cities of Skyrim, Whiterun has usually proven friendly to the Emperor's soldiers. Winterhold. This bleak, snow-blown hold in the northeast corner of Skyrim is utterly inhospitable. Perhaps the mages at the College of Winterhold chose to make their home there because they knew they would be left largely alone. As with Whiterun, the name Winterhold describes both the hold and its capital city, though the word city hardly applies. The hold capital is a meager village built near the Mages' College. Few other noteworthy settlements exist in this frozen waste, and it is unlikely to play any significant part in the war. A Dance in Fire by Vaughan Jarth, Book 1. Scene: the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. Date: 7 Frostfall, 3rd Era, 397. It seemed as if the palace had always housed the Atreus Building Commission, the company of clerks and estate agents who authored and notarized nearly every construction of any note in the Empire. It had stood for 250 years, since the reign of Emperor Magnus, a plain-faced and austere hall on a minor but respectable plaza in the Imperial City. Energetic and ambitious middle-class lads and ladies worked there, as well as complacent middle-aged ones like Derkara Skadi. No one could imagine a world without the Commission, least of all Skadi. To be accurate, he could not imagine a world without himself in the Commission. "Lord Atreus is perfectly aware of your contributions," said the managing clerk, closing the shutter that demarcated Skadi's office behind him. "But you know that things have been difficult." "Yes," said Skadi stiffly. "Lord Vennick's men have been giving us a lot of competition lately, and we must be more efficient if we are to survive. Unfortunately, that means releasing some of our historically best but presently underachieving senior clerks." "I understand. Can't be helped." "I'm glad that you understand," smiled the managing clerk, smiling thinly and withdrawing. "Please have your room cleared immediately." Skadi began the task of organizing all his work to pass on to his successor. It would probably be young Imbralius who would take most of it on, which was as it should be, he considered philosophically. The lad knew how to find business. Skadi wondered idly what the fellow would do with the contracts for the new statue of St. Alicia for which the Temple of the One had applied. Probably invent a clerical error, blame it on his old predecessor, Derkara Skadi, and require an additional cost to rectify. "I have correspondence for Derkara Skadi of the Atreus Building Commission." Skadi looked up. A fat-faced courier had entered his office and was thrusting forth a sealed scroll. He handed the boy a gold piece and opened it up. The poor penmanship, atrocious spelling and grammar, and overall unprofessional tone, it was manifestly evident who the writer was. Leotus Juris, a fellow clerk some years before, who had left the commission after being accused of unethical business practices. "Dear Skadi, I imagine you always wondered what happened to me, and the last place you would have expected to find me is out in the woods. But that's exactly where I am, haha. If you're smart and want to make a lot of extra gold for Lord Atreus, and yourself, haha, you'll come down to Valenwood too. If you haven't, or have been following the politics here lately, you may or may not know that there's been a war between the Bosmer and their neighbors elsewhere over the past 2 years. Things have only just calmed down, and there's a lot that needs to be rebuilt. Now I've got more business than I can handle, but I need someone with some clout, someone representing a respected agency to get the quill in the ink. That someone is you, my friend. Come and meet me at the Mathir Pascos Tavern in Fallenesti, Valenwood. I'll be here 2 weeks, and you won't be sorry. Juris. P.S. Bring a wagon load of timber if you can." "What do you have there, Skadi?" asked a voice. Skadi started. It was Imbralius, his damnably handsome face peeking through the shutters, smiling in that way that melted the hearts of the stingiest of patrons and the roughest of stonemasons. Skadi shoved the letter in his jacket pocket. "Personal correspondence," he sniffed. "I'll be clear up here in just a moment." "I don't want to hurry you," said Imbralius, grabbing a few sheets of blank contracts from Skadi's desk. "I've just gone through a stack, and the junior scribe's hands are all cramping up, so I thought you wouldn't miss a few." The lad vanished. Scotty retrieved the letter and read it again. He thought about his life, something he rarely did. It seemed a sea of gray with a black, insurmountable wall looming. There was only one narrow passage he could see in that wall. Quickly, before he had a moment to reconsider it, he grabbed a dozen of the blank contracts with the shimmering gold leaf. Atreus Building Commission by appointment of His Imperial Majesty, and hid them in the satchel with his personal effects. The next day he began his adventure with a giddy lack of hesitation. He arranged for a seat in a caravan bound for Valenwood, the single escorted conveyance to the southeast leaving the Imperial City that week. He had scarcely hours to pack, but he remembered to purchase a wagon load of timber. "It will be extra gold to pay for a horse to pull that," frowned the convoy head. "So I anticipated," smiled Scotty, with his best imbroglious grin. 10 wagons in all set off that afternoon through the familiar Cyrodiilic countryside, past fields of wildflowers, gently rolling woodlands, friendly hamlets. The clap of the horses' hooves against the sound stone road reminded Scotty that the Atreus Building Commission constructed it. 5 of the 18 necessary contracts for its completion were drafted by his own hand. "Very smart of you to bring that wood along," said a gray-whiskered Breton man next to him on the wagon. "You must be in commerce." "Of a sort," said Scotty, in a way he hoped was mysterious, before introducing himself. "Decumus Scotty." "Griff Malin," said the man. "I'm a poet. Actually a translator of old Bosmer literature. I was researching some newly discovered tracks of the Minoriad play bar 2 years ago when the war broke out and I had to leave. You are no doubt familiar with the Minoriad, if you're aware of the Green Pact." Scotty thought the man might be speaking perfect gibberish, but he nodded his head. "Naturally, I don't pretend that the Minoriad is as renowned as the MacLeodian, or as ancient as the Dancer Gaul, but I think it has remarkable significance to understanding the nature of the Merolithic Bosmer mind. The origin of the wood elf aversion to cutting their own wood or eating any plant material at all, yet paradoxically their willingness to import plant stuff from other cultures, I feel can be linked to a passage in the Minoriad." Malin shuffled through some of his papers, searching for the appropriate text. To Scotty's vast relief, the carriage soon stopped to camp for the night. They were high on a bluff over a gray stream, and before them was the great valley of Valenwood. Only the cry of seabirds declared the presence of the ocean to the bay to the west. Here the timber was so tall and wide, twisting around itself like an impossible knot began eons ago, to be impenetrable. A few more modest trees, only 50 feet to the lowest branches, stood on the cliff at the edge of the camp. The sight was so alien to Scotty, and he found himself so anxious about the preposition of entering the wilderness that he could not imagine sleeping. Fortunately, Malin had supposed he had found another academic with a passion for the riddles of ancient cultures. Long into the night, he recited Bosmer verse in the original and in his own translation, sobbing and bellowing and whispering wherever appropriate. Gradually, Scotty began to feel drowsy, but a sudden crack of wood snapping made him sit straight up. "What was that?" Malin smiled. "I like it too. Convocation in the malignity of the moonless speculum, a dance of fire." "There are some enormous birds up in the trees moving around," whispered Scotty, pointing in the direction of the dark shapes above. "I wouldn't worry about that," said Malin, irritated with his audience. "Now listen to how the poet characterizes Hermamora's invocation in the 8th stanza of the 4th book. The dark shapes in the trees were some of them perched like birds, others slithered like snakes, and still others stood straight up like men." As Malin recited his verse, Scotty watched the figure softly leap from branch to branch, half gliding across impossible distances for anything without wings. They gathered in groups and then reorganized until they had spread to every tree around the camp. Suddenly, they plummeted from the heights. "Mara," cried Scotty, "they're falling like rain." "Probably seed pods," Malin shrugged, not turning around. "Some of the trees have remarkable..." The camp erupted into chaos. Fires burst out in the wagons. The horses wailed from mortal blows. Casks of wine, fresh water, and liquor gushed their contents onto the ground. A nimble shadow dashed past Scotty and Malin, gathering sacks of grain and gold with impossible agility and grace. Scotty had only one glance at it, lit up by a sudden nearby burst of flame. It was a sleek creature with pointed ears, wide yellow eyes, mottled pied fur, and a tail like a whip. "Werewolf," he whimpered, shrinking back. "Cathay-rot," groaned Malin. "Much worse. Khajiit cousins or some such thing, come to plunder." "Are you sure?" As quickly as they struck, the creatures retreated, diving off the bluff before the battle mage and knight, the caravan's escorts, had fully opened their eyes. Malin and Scotty ran to the precipice and saw 100 feet below the tiny figures dash out of the water, shake themselves, and disappear into the wood. "Werewolves aren't acrobats like that," said Malin. "They were definitely Cathay-rot, bastard thieves. Thanks Stendar, they didn't realize the value of my notebooks. It wasn't a complete loss." Book 2. It was a complete loss. The Cathay-rot had stolen or destroyed almost every item of value in the caravan in just a few minutes' time. Dekumus Scotty's wagon load of wood he had hoped to trade with the Bosmer had been set on fire and then toppled off the bluff. His clothing and contracts were tattered and ground into the mud of dirt mixed with spilled wine. All the pilgrims, merchants, and adventurers in the group moaned and wept as they gathered the remnants of their belongings by the rising sun of the dawn. "I'd best not tell anyone that I managed to hold on to my notes for my translation of the Memoria de Plebar," whispered the poet Griff Malin. "They'd probably turn on me." Scotty politely declined the opportunity of telling Malin just how little value he himself placed on the man's property. Instead, he counted the coins in his purse, 34 gold pieces. Very little indeed for an entrepreneur beginning a new business. "Hoy!" came a cry from the wood. A small party of Bosmer emerged from the thicket, clad in leather mail and bearing arms. "Friend or foe?" "Neither," growled the convoy head. "You must be the Cyrodiils," laughed the leader of the group, a tall skeleton-thin youth with a sharp vulpine face. "We heard you were en route. Evidently, so did our enemies." "I thought the war was over," muttered one of the caravan's now ruined merchants. The Bosmer laughed again. "No act of war. Just a little border enterprise. You are going on to Falinesti." "I'm not." The convoy head shook his head. "As far as I'm concerned, my duty is done. No more horses, no more caravan. Just a fat profit loss to me." The men and women crowded around the man, protesting, threatening, begging, but he refused to step foot in Valenwood. If these were the new times of peace, he said, he'd rather come back for the next war. Scotty tried a different route and approached the Bosmer. He spoke with an authoritative but friendly voice, the kind he used in negotiations with peevish carpenters. "I don't suppose you'd consider escorting me to Falinesti. I'm a representative for an important imperial agency, the Atreus Building Commission, here to help repair and alleviate some of the problems the war with the Khajiit brought to your province. Patriotism. 20 gold pieces, and you must carry your own gear if you'd have any left," replied the Bosmer. Scotty reflected that negotiations with peevish carpenters rarely went his way either. 6 eager people had enough gold on them for payment. Among those without funds was the poet, who appealed to Scotty for assistance. "I'm sorry, Griff. I only have 14 gold left over. Not even enough for a decent room when I get to Fallenesti. I really would help you if I could," said Scotty, persuading himself that it was true. The band of 6 and their Bosmer escorts began the descent down a rocky path along the bluff. Within an hour's time, they were deep in the jungles of Valenwood. A never-ending canopy of hues of brown and greens obscured the sky. A millennia's worth of fallen leaves formed a deep, wormy sea of putrefaction beneath their feet. Several miles were crossed wading through the slime. For several more, they took a labyrinthian path across fallen branches and low-hanging boughs of giant trees. All the while, hour after hour, the inexhaustible Bosmer host moved so fast, the Cyrodiils struggled to keep from being left behind. A red-faced little merchant with short legs took a bad step on a rotten branch and nearly fell. His fellow provincials had to help him up. The Bosmer paused only a moment, their eyes continually darting to the shadows in the trees above before moving on at their unusual expeditious pace. "What are they so nervous about?" wheezed the merchant irritably. "More Cathay-rot?" "Don't be ridiculous," laughed the Bosmer unconvincingly. "Khajiit this far into Valenwood? In times of peace? They'd never dare." When the group passed high enough above the swamp that the smell was somewhat dissipated, Scotty felt a sudden pang of hunger. He was used to 4 meals a day in the Cyrodiilic custom. Hours of non-stop exertion without food was not part of his regimen as a comfortably paid clerk. He pondered, feeling somewhat delirious, how long they had been trotting through the jungle. 12 hours? 20? A week? Time was meaningless. Sunlight was only sporadic through the vegetative ceiling. Phosphorescent molds on the trees and in the muck below provided the only regular illumination. "Is it at all possible for us to rest and eat?" he hollered up to his host up ahead. "We're near to Fallenesti," came an echoing reply. "Lots of food there." The path continued upward for several hours more across a clot of fallen logs, rising up to the first and then the second boughs of the tree line. As they rounded a long corner, the travelers found themselves midway up a waterfall that fell 100 feet or more. No one had the energy to complain as they began pulling up the sacks of rock, agonizing foot by foot. The Bosmer escorts disappeared into the mist, but Scotty kept climbing until there was no more rock left. He wiped the sweat and river water from his eyes. Fallenesti spread across the horizon before him. Sprawling across both banks of the river stood the mighty Grot Oak City, with groves and orchards of lesser trees crowding it like supplicants before their king. At a lesser scale, the tree that formed the moving city would have been extraordinary, gnarled and twisted with a gorgeous crown of gold and green, dripping with vines and shining with sap. At a mile tall and half as wide, it was the most magnificent thing Scotty had ever seen. If he had not been a starving man with the soul of a clerk, he would have sung. "There you are," said the leader of the escorts. "Not too far a walk. You should be glad it's wintertide. In summertide, the city's on the far south end of the province." Scotty was lost as to how to proceed. The sight of the vertical metropolis where people moved about like ants disoriented all his sensibilities. "You wouldn't know of an inn called..." He paused for a moment and then pulled Juris's letter from his pocket. "Something like Mother Pasco's Tavern?" "Mother Pascost?" The lead Bosmer laughed his familiar, contemptuous laugh. "You won't want to stay there. Visitors always prefer the Icea Hall in the top boughs. It's expensive, but very nice. I'm meeting someone at Mother Pascost's Tavern." If you've made up your mind to go, take a lift to Havel Slump and ask for directions there. Just don't get lost and fall asleep in the Western Cross." This apparently struck the youth's friends as a very witty jest, and so it was with their laughter echoing behind them that Scotty crossed the withering root system to the base of Fallenesti. The ground was littered with leaves and refuse, and from moment to moment a glass or a bone would plummet from far above, so he walked with his neck crooked to have warning. An intricate network of platforms anchored to thick vines slipped up and down the slick trunk of the city with perfect grace. Manned by operators with arms as thick as an ox's belly, Scotty approaches the nearest fellow at one of the platforms, who was idly smoking from a glass pipe. "I was wondering if you might take me to Havel Slump." The Mer nodded, and within a few minutes' time, Scotty was 200 feet in the air at the crook between two mighty branches. Curled webs of moss stretched unevenly across the fork, forming a shared roof for several dozen small buildings. There were only a few souls in the alley, but around the bend ahead, he could hear the sound of music and people. Scotty tipped the Fallenesti platform ferryman a gold piece and asked for the location of Mother Pascost's tavern. "Straight ahead of you, sir, but you won't find anyone there," the ferryman explained, pointing in the direction of the noise. "Morndas everyone in Havel Slump has revelry." Scotty walked carefully along the narrow street. Though the ground felt as solid as the marble avenues of the Imperial City, there were slick cracks in the bark that exposed fatal drops to the river. He took a moment to sit down, to rest, and get used to the view from the heights. It was a beautiful day for certain, but it took Scotty only a few minutes of contemplation to rise up in alarm. A jolly little raft anchored downstream below him had distinctly moved several inches while he watched it, but it hadn't moved at all. He had, together with everything around him. It was no metaphor. The city of Fallenesti walked, and considering its size, it moved quickly. Scotty rose to his feet and into a cloud of smoke that drifted out from around the bend. It was the most delicious roast he had ever smelled. The clerk forgot his fear and ran. The revelry, as the ferryman had termed it, took place at an enormous platform tied to the tree, wide enough to be a plaza in any other city. A fantastic assortment of the most amazing people Scotty had ever seen were jammed shoulder to shoulder together, many eating, many more drinking, and some dancing to a lutist and singer perched on an offshoot above the crowd. They were largely Bosmer, true natives clad in colorful leather and bones, with a close minority of orcs. Whirling through the throng, dancing and bellowing at one another, were a hideous 8 people. A few heads bobbing over the tops of the crowd belonged not, as Scotty first assumed, to very tall people, but to a family of centaurs. "Care for some mutton?" queried a wizened old Mer who roasted an enormous beast on some red-hot rocks. Scotty quickly paid him a gold piece and devoured the leg he was given, and then another gold piece and another leg. The fellow chuckled when Scotty began choking on a piece of gristle and handed him a mug of frothing white drink. He drank it and felt a quiver run through his body as if he were being tickled. "What is that?" Scotty asked. "Jaga, fermented pig's milk. I can let you have a flagon of it and a bit more mutton for another gold." Scotty agreed, paid, gobbled down the meat, and took the flagon with him as he slipped into the crowd. His co-worker, Leotis Juris, the man who had told him to come to Valenwood, was nowhere to be seen. When the flagon was a quarter empty, Scotty stopped looking for Juris. When it was half empty, he was dancing with the group, oblivious to the broken planks and gaps in the fencework. At 3/4 empty, He was trading jokes with a group of creatures whose language was completely alien to him. By the time the flagon was completely drained, he was asleep, snoring, while the revelry continued all around his supine body. The next morning, still asleep, Scotty had the sensation of someone kissing him. He made a face to return the favor, but a pain like fire spread through his chest and forced him to open his eyes. There was an insect the size of a large calf sitting on him, crushing him, its spiky legs holding him down, while a central spiral-bladed vortex of a mouth tore through his shirt. He screamed and thrashed, but the beast was too strong. It had found its meal, and it was going to finish it. "It's over," thought Scotty wildly. "I should have never left home. I could have stayed in the city and perhaps found work with Lord Vanek. I could have begun again as a junior clerk and worked my way back up." Suddenly, the mouth released itself. The creature shivered once, expelled a burst of yellow bile, and died. "Got one!" cried a voice not too distantly. For a moment, Scotty lay still. His head throbbed and his chest burned. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Another one of the horrible monsters was scurrying towards him. He scrambled, trying to push himself free, but before he could come out, there was a sound of a bow cracking and an arrow pierced the second insect. "Good shot!" cried another voice. "Get the first one again. I just saw it move a little." This time, Scotty felt the impact of the bolt hit the carcass. He cried out, but he could hear how muffled his voice was by the beetle's body. Cautiously, he tried slithering a foot out and rolling under it. But the movement apparently had the effect of convincing the archers that the creature still lived. A volley of arrows was launched forth. Now, the beast was sufficiently perforated so pools of its blood, and likely the blood of its victims, began to seep out onto Scotty's body. When Scotty was a lad, before he grew too sophisticated for such sports, he had often gone to the imperial arena for the competitions of war. He recalled a great veteran of the fights, when asked, telling him his secret. "Whenever I'm in doubt of what I do, and I have a shield, I stay behind it." Scotty followed that advice. After an hour, when he no longer heard arrows being fired, he threw aside the remains of the bug and leapt as quickly as he could to a stand. It was not a moment too soon. A gang of 8 archers had their bows pointing his direction, ready to fire. When they saw him, they laughed. "Didn't anyone ever tell you not to sleep in the Western Cross? How are we going to exterminate all the Horvars if you drunks keep feeding them?" Scotty shook his head and walked back along the platform, round the bend, to Havel's slump. He was bloodied and torn and tired, and he had far too much fermented pig's milk. All he wanted was a proper place to lie down. He stepped into Mother Pascott's tavern, a dank place, wet with sap, smelling of mildew. "My name is Dakuma Scotty," he said. "I was hoping you have someone named Juris staying here." Dakuma Scotty, pondered the fleshy proprietress. Mother Pascost herself. "I've heard that name. Oh, you must be the fellow he left the note for. Let me go see if I can find it." Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you didn't mind the change of format. If you did like it, let me know. Maybe I'll do some more of these later on, where it's just watching some video and me laying something over the top of it. Whether it's related or not, I don't know. But we'll see how it goes. Until next time, sleep well, stay healthy, and safe travels.